The great Galactic Tribunal station floated in the darkness of space like a massive crystal flower. Its 12 petals glowed with different colors, each one representing a major alien civilization. Inside the largest chamber, hundreds of beings from dozens of different worlds had gathered to watch the trial. Kang Minho sat in the defendant's chair, looking small compared to the massive aliens around him. He was 28 years old with short black hair and tired eyes. His cargo pilot uniform was wrinkled and dirty from weeks in a holding cell. He did not look like someone who could threaten an entire galaxy. The chief arbiter, Velthar, stood at the center of the room. She was from the Hive worlds, with 6 arms and compound eyes that glittered like black diamonds. Her voice made a clicking sound when she spoke through the translation device. "Human-designated Kang Minho," she announced. "You stand accused of 17 violations of galactic law. How do you answer?" Minho looked around the courtroom. There were beings made of living crystal, others that looked like walking trees, and some that seemed to be made of pure energy. All of them were staring at him with expressions he could not read. "I didn't know about your laws," he said simply. His voice was calm, which surprised many in the audience. Most beings brought before the tribunal begged or screamed. A sound like angry buzzing filled the chamber. Velthar raised one of her arms for silence. "Ignorance is not a defense in galactic law," she clicked. "You transported banned biomaterials through the Zephyr system. You crossed military zones without permission. You landed on Quarantine Moon 77 Alpha. Each of these crimes carries a death sentence." Dr. Yoon Ji-won sat in the observer section, taking notes on a small device. She was one of only 3 humans allowed to watch the trial. As a xenobiologist, she studied alien life forms. But today she was more interested in studying how aliens reacted to humans. "The accused shows no remorse," said Arbiter Kethlan from the Silicon Collective. His voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "This proves humans are dangerous to galactic peace." "They barely understand fire," added Arbiter Morthex from the thermal communes. Her body glowed red-hot and the air around her shimmered. Yet they fly between stars. They are chaos waiting to happen. Minho listened to them talk about humans like they were discussing dangerous animals. He had heard this before. Most aliens thought humans were primitive and violent. They were not completely wrong, but they were not completely right either. "The court has reviewed all evidence," Velthar announced. "The humans' cargo ship carried samples of the death bloom fungus, which is banned in all civilized systems. He flew through the neutral zone during wartime, which could have started a conflict between the hegemony and the alliance. He landed on a world where a plague killed millions, risking contamination of his ship and any world he visited next. The charges were serious." Minho had to admit that, but he really had not known about any of these laws. He was just trying to make a living hauling cargo between the outer colonies. Nobody had given him a guidebook to galactic law. "The punishment for these crimes," Velthar continued, "is death, but the court has decided on a different sentence. One that will serve as a warning to other humans about the consequences of ignoring our laws." The chamber became very quiet. Even the energy beings stopped their constant humming. "Kang Minho, you are sentenced to exile on Keth Prime." A gasp went through the audience. Even the aliens seemed shocked by this decision. Dr. Yoon Ji-won dropped her note-taking device. Keth Prime was famous throughout the galaxy. It was a Class X death world, the most dangerous classification possible. The planet had crushing gravity, poisonous air, extreme temperatures, and wildlife that could kill a battle tank. The longest any being had survived there was 72 hours, and that was a trained military specialist from the warrior clans. "This sentence will be broadcast throughout the galaxy," Velthar announced. "Let all species see what happens to those who threaten galactic peace." Minho stood up slowly. The restraints around his wrists made a soft beeping sound. "When do I leave?" he asked. This was not the reaction anyone expected. Most being sentenced to Keth Prime collapsed in terror. Others raged against the court, demanding different punishment. Some begged for mercy, but Minho just wanted to know the schedule. Velthar's compound eyes focused on him with new interest. "You do not seem afraid, human. Would being afraid change anything?" Minho asked. "No," she admitted. "Then I'll save my energy for something useful." Dr. Yoon Ji-won watched this exchange with growing amazement. She had studied Minho's background before the trial. He was born on Jeju Colony, one of humanity's frontier worlds. The planet was harsh by human standards with dangerous storms and hostile wildlife. Children there learn to hunt, build shelters, and survive in the wilderness before they learn to read. But the aliens did not know this. They saw Minho as just another soft human from an easy world. They expected him to break down when faced with real danger. "The transport will leave in 6 hours," Velthar announced. "You will be given basic survival equipment. Water for 3 days, food for 2, shelter material, and emergency medical supplies." "Will I get a weapon?" Minho asked. "No weapons are permitted," Minho nodded. "What about tools?" "A basic cutting implement and fire starter." "Thank you." Again, his politeness surprised the court. Arbiters from 12 different species looked at each other with confusion. This human was either very brave or very stupid. Most of them suspected stupidity. As the guards led Minho away, Dr. Yunjiwan made careful notes about every word spoken, every reaction shown. She had a feeling this trial would be remembered for a long time, but not for the reasons the tribunal expected. The broadcast would indeed go out to billions of beings across the galaxy. They would watch expecting to see a human die horribly on the most dangerous world known to science. What they would actually see would change how the galaxy thought about humans forever, but that was still hours away. For now, Kang Minho was just a condemned man, walking toward what everyone believed was certain death, only he seemed to think it might be something else entirely. The chamber slowly emptied as beings returned to their ships and homeworlds. Soon the story of the human and the Deathworld would begin, and the galaxy would learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a human is give them a challenge they cannot refuse. The transport ship shuddered as it entered Keth Prime's atmosphere. Through the small window, Minho could see the planet's surface rushing up to meet them. Red rock stretched as far as he could see, broken by deep cracks that glowed with heat from below. The sky was the color of old blood, and 2 small suns burned overhead like angry eyes. "Deploying prisoner," the ship's computer announced in a flat voice. The floor opened beneath Minho's feet. He fell through the hot air with his small pack of supplies strapped to his back. The gravity was stronger than Earth's, pulling at him like a heavy blanket. His parachute opened with a sharp crack, and he drifted down toward the wasteland below. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched through the cameras attached to his clothes and pack. The broadcast was the most popular show in known space. Everyone wanted to see how long the human would last. Dr. Yunji-Wan watched from her laboratory on the tribunal station. She had recorded everything about Minho's drop, the planet's conditions, the equipment he carried, even the way he moved during the fall. Her instruments told her the planet was even worse than the official reports said. The gravity was 1.8 times Earth normal. The air was thin and filled with dust that could cut lungs like tiny knives. Radiation from the twin suns was dangerous to most species. The temperature would swing from freezing cold at night to burning hot during the day. And according to the planetary survey, everything that lived on Keth Prime was designed to kill. Minho hit the ground hard and rolled to absorb the impact. The rocky surface scraped against his uniform, but the thick fabric held. He stood up slowly, testing his balance in the heavy gravity, and looked around. The drop zone was a flat area surrounded by tall rock formations. The ground was covered with red dust and scattered with bones from previous exiles. Some of the bones were very large, suggesting they came from species much bigger than humans. He checked his supplies. 3 days of water in recycling bottles, 2 days of nutrition bars, a small shelter that could be set up quickly, a basic medical kit, a cutting tool that was more like a large knife, a fire starter, and an emergency beacon that would only work if he was dying. Not much, he said to himself, but it's more than I had on Jeju during survival training. The cameras recorded everything he said and did, in comfortable homes across the galaxy, being settled in to watch the humans' final hours. Most bet he would die before the first night. The smart money said he would last maybe 12 hours. Minho opened his pack and pulled out the planetary survey information. It was basic data, dangerous areas to avoid, types of predators, poisonous plants. The kind of information meant to help someone survive just long enough to send a final message home. But Minho read it like a treasure map. The survey mentioned water sources in the deep canyons. It listed edible plants marked with warnings about their locations in predator territory. It described the habits of various creatures, noting which ones hunted during day and which preferred night. They think this is a death sentence, Minho muttered, studying the data. But this is just camping with extra steps. The first step was shelter. The twin suns were already heating up the air, and he knew the temperature would get much worse. He walked to the base of a tall rock formation and found a spot where two large stones leaned against each other, creating a natural cave. He used his cutting tool to clear away loose rocks and bones. Then he unpacked his emergency shelter. It was designed to be a simple tent, but Minho had other ideas. He used the reflective material to create a heat barrier at the cave entrance. The remaining fabric became insulation for the floor and walls. While he worked, something watched him from the rocks above. It looked like a cross between a lizard and a spider, with 6 legs and teeth like broken glass. The locals called it a razor spine crawler. It had killed the last 3 beings dropped on this spot. The creature waited for the human to show weakness. All prey animals panicked eventually. Then it would strike, but Minho kept working. He gathered flat stones to create a level floor. He dug a small pit for waste and another for water storage. He even found some dried wood and made a small fire pit outside the cave entrance. By the time the first sun reached its highest point, he had a comfortable shelter that would protect him from heat, cold, and most predators. "Time for water," he announced to his invisible audience. The survey data mentioned a stream 2 kilometers away, deep in Razor Canyon. Every species that had tried to reach it had been killed by the creatures that lived there. But Minho had noticed something the survey missed. The canyon walls were covered with a particular type of vine. On Jeju Colony, similar vines grew near underground water sources. If he was right, he would not need to go to the stream at all. He climbed carefully down into a smaller canyon nearby. The gravity made every step difficult, but he moved slowly and tested each handhold. Halfway down the wall, he found what he was looking for. The vines were thick and succulent, filled with stored water. He cut into one with his knife and clean water dripped out. It tasted bitter, but it was safe to drink. One vine held almost a liter of water. "Water problem solved," he said, filling his bottles. Above him, the razor spine crawler followed his movements. It was confused. The human was not acting like prey. Prey animals ran around in panic, making noise and attracting attention. This human moved quietly and carefully like a predator. As the day grew hotter, Minho returned to his shelter. He sealed himself inside and waited. Through the thin walls, he could hear things moving outside, scratching sounds, low growls. The scrape of claws on stone. The crawler had called for help. 3 more of its kind surrounded the shelter, waiting for the human to come out. But Minho did not come out. He rested during the hot afternoon, conserving his energy. He ate 1 nutrition bar slowly, making it last. He drank small sips of vine water. He checked his equipment and planned his next moves. As the second sun began to set, the temperature dropped quickly. The crawlers outside grew more active, sensing that their prey might emerge to look for food. They were right. But they were also wrong. Minho did emerge from his shelter, but he came out through a gap in the back wall that he had prepared earlier. While the crawlers watched the front entrance, he circled around behind them. He had spent the afternoon making a trap from materials found near his shelter. Sharp stones wedged between rocks, a deadfall trigger made from balanced bones, a pit covered with thin stone and dust. The first crawler fell into the pit and was crushed by falling rocks. The others spun around looking for their prey, but Minho was already moving. He had made a spear from a straight piece of wood and his cutting tool. When the second crawler charged him, he planted the spear point in the ground and let the creature impale itself on the blade. The third crawler was smarter. It backed away and called for more help. But Minho threw a sharp stone with the accuracy of someone who had hunted dangerous animals since childhood. The stone caught the crawler in its center mass and it died instantly. The fourth crawler ran away. Across the galaxy, beings stared at their screens in shock. The human had not only survived his first day on Keth Prime, he had killed 3 apex predators with primitive weapons. "Impossible," clicked Chief Arbiter Velthar. The survey said those creatures were unkillable. Dr. Yoon Ji-won smiled as she made her notes. "Maybe," she said quietly. "They never tried killing them with a human." As the temperature dropped toward freezing, Minho dragged the dead crawlers back to his camp. Their meat would feed him for days. Their shells could be made into better tools and armor. Their bones would become spear points and knife handles. He built up his fire and began to prepare his first real meal on Keth Prime. The meat smelled good when it cooked, and it tasted even better. "Day 1 complete," he said to the cameras. Thank you for the hospitality." Somewhere in the darkness, other predators heard his voice and smelled the smoke from his fire. They began to move toward the light, drawn by curiosity and hunger. They had no idea what was waiting for them. 3 months had passed since Minho's arrival on Keth Prime. The betting pools across the galaxy had closed long ago, their owners unable to pay out to the few beings who had wagered the human would survive past the first week. Now millions watched the daily broadcast not to see him die, but to see what impossible thing he would do next. Minho's camp had grown into something that looked almost comfortable. His original cave shelter now had multiple rooms carved into the rock face. The main living area stayed cool during the day and warm at night. A workshop area held tools made from crawler bones and metal salvaged from previous supply drops. A food storage room kept meat dried and preserved using techniques learned on the frontier worlds. But the most impressive addition was his companion's 6 tunnel hounds lay sleeping near the fire pit outside his cave. They looked like wolves crossed with armored lizards, originally one of Keth Prime's most dangerous pack hunters. Minho had found an injured pup 3 weeks earlier and nursed it back to health. When the pack came looking for their missing member, Minho had offered them food and shelter instead of fighting. Now they served as guards, hunting partners, and early warning systems. The pack leader, a scarred female Minho called Scar, had become especially protective of him. She could sense approaching danger hours before his human senses detected anything. "Good morning, beautiful," Minho said to Scar, as she opened one yellow eye to watch him prepare his breakfast. She made a rumbling sound that might have been contentment. Across the galaxy, Dr. Yoon Ji-won continued her detailed observations from the Tribunal station. Her reports to Earth's colonial administration were being read by some of the most important humans in space. What Minho was accomplishing on Keth Prime was changing how other species saw humanity. Subject continues to demonstrate remarkable adaptation to hostile environment, she dictated to her recording device. Day 91. He has established sustainable food sources through hunting, gathering, and limited agriculture. Water needs met through vine tapping and a small collection system built to catch moisture from the morning mist. She paused to watch Minho tend to a small garden he had planted near his cave. Nothing was supposed to grow in Keth Prime's poisonous soil, but he had found a way to clean it using ash from his fires and a filtering system made from crawler shells. Most significant development, she continued, is his success with local fauna. Where previous exiles were killed by predators, Subject has established cooperative relationships. This suggests either remarkable luck or skills not previously documented in human capabilities. The truth was that Minho was not doing anything especially remarkable by human standards. He was using techniques taught to children on frontier worlds, basic survival skills, animal handling, and resource management. But what seemed normal to humans appeared miraculous to species that had never faced real hardship. On this particular morning, Minho had plans that would have terrified most galactic citizens. The orbital cameras had detected something new in the deep desert, another supply drop. But this one was different. "Attention, prisoner," came an announcement from a speaker that had been dropped with the supplies. "The tribunal has decided to increase the challenge of your sentence. 3 additional subjects will be joining you on Keth Prime. You are not required to assist them in any way." Minho looked at Scar, who had raised her head at the sound of the mechanical voice. "What do you think, girl? Ready for some company?" The first new arrival landed about 5 kilometers from Minho's camp. Through the long-range scope he had made from polished crawler shell, he watched a large figure struggle with its parachute. Even from this distance, he could tell the newcomer was from the Spine Ridge clans, a warrior species known for their strength and aggressive nature. The second drop was closer, only 2 kilometers away. This one landed hard and did not move for several minutes. When it finally stood up, Minho could see it was a Silicon Collective member, probably a criminal or political exile. They were known for being intelligent but physically fragile. The third arrival came down almost on top of his camp. Scar and her pack growled at the descending parachute, but Minho calmed them with hand signals. This one was small and moved with fluid grace even in the heavy gravity, probably from the Shadow Dominion, judging by the dark clothing and careful movements. Minho gathered some supplies and called to his hounds. "Come on, Pack. Time to make some new friends." The closest newcomer was already in trouble. The Shadow Dominion exile had landed near a nest of acid spitters. insect-like creatures that dissolved their prey before eating it. 3 of them had cornered the small figure behind a rock formation. Minho approached carefully, his spear ready, and his pack spread out to surround the area. The exile was armed with some kind of energy weapon, but it was not working properly in Keth Prime's harsh environment. "Stay down," Minho called out in Galactic Standard. "I'll handle this." He had learned that acid spitters were actually cowards when faced with organized resistance. He threw stones to distract them while Scar and 2 other hounds attacked from the sides. The insects scattered, looking for easier prey. The exile stood up slowly, keeping the useless weapon pointed at Minho. It was a female from the Shadow Dominion, with pale gray skin and large dark eyes. Her name, she eventually told him, was Nira. "Why help me?" she asked suspiciously. "Because you're going to die if I don't," Minho replied, "and because 4 people have a better chance of surviving here than 3 people and 1 corpse." It took some convincing, but Nira eventually agreed to follow him back to his camp. Along the way, they collected the Silicon Collective exile, a former engineer named Korath who had been caught selling military secrets. He was badly injured from his landing but still alive. The Spine Ridge warrior was named Drac, and he was not interested in cooperation. When Minho approached him with an offer of food and shelter, Drac challenged him to single combat for the right to the territory. "I don't want your territory," Minho explained patiently. "I want to share mine. There's enough room for all of us." "Weakness," Drac snarled. "The strong take what they need. The weak serve or die. The dead serve no one," Minho replied, "and dead people can't help each other survive." It took 3 days of watching Minho's camp to convince Drac that cooperation might be more effective than conquest. The human had food, water, shelter, and protection. He had turned a Deathworld into a home. That took a different kind of strength than Drac was used to. By the end of the first week, all 4 exiles were working together. Drac's strength was useful for heavy construction work. Korath's engineering knowledge helped improve their tools and shelters. Nira's stealth skills made her an excellent scout and hunter, but Minho remained the unofficial leader, not because he was the strongest or smartest, but because he understood how to make the group work together. "Different species, different strengths," he explained to Dr. Yoon Ji-won's cameras one evening as they sat around their shared fire. "Humans aren't the best at any one thing, but we're good at figuring out how to use what we have." "Including other people?" Nira asked. She was still suspicious of his motives, especially other people, Minho confirmed. "A pack works better than a lone wolf." As if to prove his point, Scar and her hounds spread out around the camp to begin their nightly patrol. They had accepted the other species as part of their extended pack. On a world where everything tried to kill them, cooperation was the difference between life and death. Chief Arbiter Velthar watched the broadcast from her private chambers on the Tribunal station. She had expected the additional exiles to fight each other for resources. Instead, they were building something that looked almost like a small town. "Status report on the Keth Prime exiles," she commanded her assistant. "All 4 subjects remain alive and healthy," came the reply. "They have constructed permanent shelters, established sustainable food production, and successfully defended against multiple predator attacks. Their success rate exceeds all projections." Velthar's compound eyes focused on the screen showing Minho teaching Drac how to weave baskets from dried vines. It was a peaceful domestic scene that should have been impossible on a Class X Deathworld. "Perhaps," she clicked thoughtfully, "we need to reconsider our assumptions about impossible things." 1 year after his arrival on Keth Prime, Minho stood on a ridge overlooking what had once been empty wasteland. Below him stretched the settlement they called Haven, a collection of stone buildings, cultivated fields, and workshops that housed 53 beings from 12 different species. What had started as 4 desperate exiles sharing a cave had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. Word had spread through the criminal underground that Keth Prime was no longer a death sentence. Some beings were now committing crimes specifically hoping to be sent there. The tribunal had tried to stop the flow by sending more dangerous criminals, but Minho and his growing community had developed systems for handling even the worst arrivals. Violent prisoners were given clear rules and consequences. Those who refused to follow community guidelines were exiled to distant parts of the planet with basic supplies. Most chose to return and cooperate rather than face the wilderness alone. "Morning report, Administrator." said Korath, approaching with a datapad made from polished metal and etched with symbols. The Silicon Collective engineer had appointed himself record keeper for the settlement. Minho still felt strange being called administrator. The title had been given to him by popular vote 6 months earlier, when the settlement grew too large for informal leadership. He had not wanted the job, but nobody else seemed able to get the different species to work together as effectively. "What's the situation?" Minho asked, accepting the improvised pad. "Food production is up 12% from last month," Korath reported. "The new terracing system is working better than projected. Water storage is adequate for the dry season. Defense grid is complete around the perimeter." The defense grid was one of their proudest achievements. Instead of walls or weapons, they had created a network of early warning systems and safe paths that allowed them to detect and avoid predators rather than fight them. It was a uniquely human approach, working with the environment instead of trying to dominate it. "Any problems?" Minho asked. 3 minor disputes between the thermal preference groups and the cold-adapted species over workshop schedules. 1 request for arbitration regarding mating rights among the Helix clan refugees. And we have a new arrival incoming. Minho looked up at the sky where a small transport ship was descending toward their designated landing area. "Scheduled or emergency?" "Emergency," Korath replied. "Single passenger, priority diplomatic status." This was unusual. The tribunal typically sent groups of prisoners on scheduled drops. A single emergency transport suggested something important was happening in the wider galaxy. The ship landed near the settlement's edge, and Minho walked out to meet it with Scar and 2 of her grown pups. The hounds had become something of a symbol for Haven, proof that even the most dangerous predators could become allies under the right circumstances. The ship's hatch opened, and Chief Arbiter Velthar stepped out. Minho was surprised but tried not to show it. He had expected this visit eventually. Haven's success was becoming an embarrassment to the tribunal's authority. Beings throughout the galaxy were questioning whether exile to a Deathworld was really punishment, if prisoners ended up living better lives than law-abiding citizens on many civilized worlds. "Chief Arbiter," Minho said formally, "welcome to Haven." Velthar's compound eyes swept over the settlement. She could see cultivated fields, workshops producing tools and art, children from multiple species playing together in designated safe areas, and adults engaged in productive work. It looked more like a successful colony than a prison camp. "I have come to investigate reports of illegal activities on Keth Prime," she announced. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Which activities would those be?" Minho asked politely. "Creating permanent structures without proper permits, engaging in unauthorized agriculture, establishing trade relationships with non-sentenced individuals." The last charge referred to Haven's growing relationship with some of Keth Prime's native species. The planet was not actually uninhabited as the original surveys had claimed. Several intelligent species lived in the deep cave systems, and they had begun trading with the settlement. Haven's metalwork and preserved foods were exchanged for minerals and information about the planet's geography. "I wasn't aware we needed permits to not die," Minho replied, "but I'm sure we can work something out." Dr. Yoon Ji-won had arrived on the same transport as the Chief Arbiter, though officially she was just there as an observer. She had been promoted to senior xenobiologist for Earth's colonial administration, largely based on her reports about Haven's success. "The settlement appears to be thriving," she commented, making notes on a proper electronic device. "Population is healthy, infrastructure is sound, and social cohesion is remarkably high for such a diverse group." "These are criminals," Velthar reminded her. "They were sent here to die, not to build a model community." "Maybe," said a new voice. "That says something about your model of justice." Minho turned to see Nira approaching from the settlement. The Shadow Dominion exile had become Haven's head of security, responsible for integrating new arrivals and maintaining order. She had also become one of Minho's closest advisors. "You were sentenced to death for assassination and terrorism." Velthar clicked at her. "Now you wish to lecture the tribunal on justice." "I was sentenced for trying to stop a war by eliminating corrupt officials," Nira corrected. "Here I help keep the peace. Which version of me is more dangerous to galactic stability?" This was the question that kept tribunal members awake at night. Haven's residents were not just surviving, they were contributing to something positive. Many of them showed more respect for law and order than they had before their exile. Some had developed skills and perspectives that would be valuable to any society. "I want a full tour of your facilities," Velthar announced. "I want to interview your residents. I want to understand how this situation developed." "Of course," Minho agreed. "Korith, would you arrange accommodations for our guests? Something suitable for their environmental needs?" The tour took 3 days. Velthar saw the workshops where exiles created tools, furniture, and art objects from local materials. She visited the agricultural terraces where multiple species worked together to grow food adapted to Keth Prime's harsh conditions. She observed the school where adults taught children from different worlds about science, history, and cooperation. She also attended one of Haven's weekly council meetings, where disputes were resolved through discussion and compromise rather than force or authority. It was messy and inefficient compared to tribunal justice, but it seemed to work. "How do you maintain order without proper law enforcement?" Velthar asked Minho during a private dinner on the second evening. "We don't maintain order," Minho replied. "We create it. Every day, everyone participates because everyone benefits. What about those who refuse to participate? They're free to leave, some do. Most come back. And if they commit crimes against other residents, then the community decides how to handle it. Sometimes that means exile. Sometimes it means making up for the damage done. Sometimes it means getting help with whatever problem caused the behavior in the first place." Velthar found this approach disturbing. Justice, in her view, required clear rules and consistent punishment. Haven's system seemed to rely too much on individual judgment and group consensus, but she could not argue with the results. Crime rates in Haven were lower than most civilized worlds. Productivity was high. Residents reported high levels of satisfaction with their lives. Children were healthy and well-educated. The settlement was not just surviving, it was prospering. On the final day of her visit, Velthar made an announcement that would change the course of galactic history. "The tribunal has decided," she declared to the assembled residents, "to redesignate Keth Prime as an experimental rehabilitation facility. Being sentenced to exile here will have the opportunity to earn their freedom through community service and demonstrated reform." The crowd erupted in cheers and celebration. Many residents had given up hope of ever leaving Keth Prime, accepting that they would live and die as exiles. Now they had a chance to return to the wider galaxy as free beings. But Minho felt a strange mix of emotions. Haven had become his home in a way that nowhere else ever had. The idea of leaving felt almost like another kind of exile. "What about those who want to stay?" he asked. "That," Velthar replied, "will be up to the individual colonies to decide." As the chief arbiter prepared to return to Tribunal Station, she pulled Minho aside for a final conversation. "You have created something remarkable here," she admitted. "But you must understand this cannot be replicated everywhere. Most beings are not capable of what you humans call making the best of things." "Maybe," Minho replied. "But maybe they just need the right example." As Velthar's ship lifted off into Keth Prime's red sky, Minho wondered if she was right. Was Haven a unique occurrence or proof that beings were capable of more than anyone had imagined? He suspected they would all find out soon enough. 18 months after his original death sentence, Minho stood in the same crystalline courtroom where it all began. But everything had changed. The defendant's chair was empty. Instead, Minho sat at a table marked Colonial Administrator, Keth Prime Rehabilitation Facility. Next to him sat Dr. Yoon Jiwon, now serving as Earth's official representative to the Galactic Council. Behind them, in the observer section, sat representatives from dozens of worlds, all wanting to learn about the Haven model of criminal justice. Chief Arbiter Velthar called the session to order. Her compound eyes reflected the lights of hundreds of recording devices. This hearing was being broadcast to every civilized world in the galaxy. "This tribunal convenes to review the status of the Keth Prime Experimental Rehabilitation Facility," she announced. 18 months ago, we sentenced a human criminal to death by exile. Today, we must decide whether our justice system requires fundamental reform. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Haven now housed over 200 residents from 37 different species. Crime rates within the settlement were 90% lower than galactic averages. Productivity exceeded most established colonies. Most remarkably, voluntary departure rates were less than 5%. Most beings chose to stay even when offered full pardons and citizenship elsewhere. "The first question," Velthar continued, is whether the Keth Prime facility can be considered a success by traditional measures. Korath stood to present the official statistics. The Silicon Collective engineer had become Haven's chief analyst, tracking everything from food production to psychological wellness indicators. His data showed consistent improvement across all quality-of-life measures. Residents report 94% satisfaction with living conditions, he stated. Educational achievement has increased by 300% compared to pre-exile levels. Medical incidents have decreased by 78%. Most significantly, recidivism rates among those who have left and returned to society are 0%. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Zero recidivism was unheard of in galactic justice systems. Most rehabilitation programs considered a 50% success rate to be excellent. These numbers are impressive, admitted Arbiter Kathleen from the Silicon Collective. But the question remains whether this model can be applied to other worlds and populations. This was the heart of the debate that had been raging across the galaxy for months. Haven worked on Keth Prime with a specific mix of species and circumstances. Critics argued that it was a unique situation that could not be replicated. Administrator Minho, Velthar said, "Please explain your methodology." Minho stood up slowly. He still felt uncomfortable being the center of attention for so many powerful beings, but he had learned that sometimes the most important conversations happened when you least wanted to have them. "There's no special methodology," he said simply. "We just treated people like they mattered." "Elaborate," Velthar requested. "Most justice systems are based on punishment," Minho explained. "The idea is that if you hurt someone enough, they'll stop doing bad things. But punishment only works if people have better options available. If you don't give them better options, they just get better at hiding their crimes." He gestured toward the observer section, where several former Haven residents sat wearing the uniforms of various legitimate organizations. Some had become teachers, others researchers. Still others had started businesses on their home worlds. At Haven, we focused on giving people reasons to choose cooperation over conflict. Good housing, meaningful work, fair treatment, and a voice in community decisions. Most beings will choose to follow rules if the rules make sense and if breaking them hurts people they care about. But surely some individuals cannot be reformed, pressed Arbiter Morthex from the thermal communes. What about violent psychopaths? Political extremists? Those who commit crimes for ideology rather than desperation? Nira stood up from the observer section. She had been given special permission to address the tribunal as a former political prisoner who had successfully integrated into Haven's community. "I was a violent extremist," she said clearly. "I killed 17 beings because I believed their deaths would prevent a war. I was wrong about the war, but I was also wrong about killing. Haven didn't change what I believed. It gave me better ways to act on my beliefs." She had become Haven's chief mediator, helping resolve disputes between different species and factions. Her skills in understanding conflict had proven valuable for preventing violence rather than causing it. "The difference," she continued, "is that at Haven, my opinions mattered. I was listened to instead of silenced. When people feel heard, they don't need to scream." Dr. Yoon Jiwon had been taking careful notes throughout the proceedings. As Earth's representative, she was most interested in how Haven's success might affect humanity's status in galactic civilization. "If I may," she interjected, "I believe the key factor is not the methodology itself, but the leadership approach that makes it work." All eyes turned to her. This was the argument she had been preparing for months. "Humans have a unique evolutionary background," she explained. "We developed on a world that the galaxy would classify as extremely dangerous. This gave us certain psychological adaptations, the ability to see opportunity in crisis, to form cooperative bonds under stress, and to find creative solutions when traditional approaches fail." She activated a holographic display showing comparative data from multiple worlds. Other species tend to solve problems through specialization, becoming very good at one approach. Humans solve problems through adaptation, finding new approaches when old ones don't work. This makes us particularly effective at managing diverse groups in challenging situations. "Are you suggesting," asked Velthar, "that humans are naturally superior at criminal justice?" "Not superior," Dr. Yoon Ji-won replied carefully. "Different. Human approaches work well for situations that require flexibility and innovation. Other species approaches work better for maintaining stability and consistency. This was diplomatic language for a radical idea. She was suggesting that the galaxy's justice systems might benefit from incorporating human perspectives, not as replacement for existing methods, but as additional tools for specific situations. The tribunal deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Velthar's expression was unreadable. The tribunal has reached several decisions, she announced. First, the Keth Prime Rehabilitation Facility is hereby recognized as a legitimate alternative to traditional criminal punishment. Cheers erupted from the observer section, but Velthar raised an arm for silence. Second, similar facilities will be established on 12 volunteer worlds, under joint administration between local governments and qualified human advisors. This was more than anyone had dared hope for. The Haven model would be tested on a galactic scale. Third, Velthar continued, Administrator Minho is hereby pardoned of all previous crimes and appointed as Director of Galactic Rehabilitation Services, with full authority to develop and implement alternative justice programs. Minho felt dizzy. A year and a half ago, he had been a cargo pilot who accidentally broke laws he didn't know existed. Now he was being offered one of the most important positions in galactic government. And finally, Velthar said, looking directly at him, participation in this program is entirely voluntary, for administrators, residents, and host worlds alike. This was the escape clause that made the whole thing politically possible. No one would be forced to try the new approach. Those who preferred traditional justice could continue using it. After the session ended, Minho found himself surrounded by reporters, diplomats, and curious beings from across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to know how a human cargo pilot had revolutionized criminal justice. "What's your secret?" asked a journalist from the Crystal Hegemony. Minho thought about it seriously before answering. "I don't think there is a secret," he said finally. "We just remembered that everyone, even criminals, used to be someone's child. And most children turn out okay if you give them what they need to grow." Dr. Yoon Ji-won joined him as the crowd dispersed. "So," she asked, "will you take the position?" Minho looked out through the station's transparent walls at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, Keth Prime continued its orbit around twin suns. Haven would survive and thrive whether he was there or not. The community was strong enough now to lead itself. But there were other worlds out there. Other desperate beings who had given up hope of redemption. Other communities that could be built from the wreckage of failed lives. "I think," he said slowly, "that's exactly what I'm going to do." 5 years later, the Galactic Rehabilitation Service operated facilities on 47 worlds. Recidivism rates had dropped by an average of 60% across participating systems. Most importantly, thousands of beings who had once been written off as irredeemable had found new purpose and meaning in their lives. Minho still returned to Haven regularly. It remained his home base and his inspiration. The settlement had grown into a small city, complete with schools, hospitals, and manufacturing centers. Some of the galaxy's most innovative research was being conducted by former criminals who had been given second chances. On quiet evenings, he would sit with Scar, now an elderly matriarch of a pack that numbered in the dozens.